Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTube, wherever you may be. Welcome back again to another edition of FX Studio. I am your host, G Sharp Jams. And as you can see, I'm still here in my living room at home, still rewiring the studio, getting all of that done. Want to make sure that everything is working perfectly before I get back in there and start doing my videos from there again. It is a headache, it's taking time, but it's something that needed to be done. So just bear with me. Maybe the next video will be from right here in my home. Maybe it'll be from the studio, but we'll see. I'll get to that pretty quickly and get that done. But anyway, today we're going to take a look at three different things. The first one being something that I barely ever use when I'm mixing and mastering, and that is mid-side processing. And I'll explain why. The second is something that I'm considering using, and the third one is something that I always use when I'm mixing and mastering. We'll get to those in just a moment. Okay, and welcome back. To get started, we're going to talk about mid-side processing, what it is, when to use it, when not to use it, and why I barely use it when I mix and master. Mid-side processing is basically taking the entire mix and looking at the two sides and then the center. The center being your mids, and then your two sides being the two separate sides of your stereo mix. Now, let's start with the mids. In the mid, this is where you want the vocals, the bass drum, and the bass guitar to sit, right dead center in the middle so that they stand out. That's where you should put your vocals and anything bass heavy and your kick drum. On the two sides, you might put a guitar over here, a lead guitar here, a rhythm guitar over here, your keyboardist over here, your backup vocal over here, the second backup vocal over here, and any other instruments. Those are going to be in your stereo field on the two sides. So you have your two sides and you have your mid. Now, what does mid-side processing do? It's very simple. A lot of people overcomplicate this, but it's very simple to understand. Mid-side processing is processing the two side signals together separately from the mids. It comes in two different flavors. You can either use mid-side compression or you can use mid-side EQ. Now, the question becomes, why do I choose to stay away from this? And the answer is really very simple. Think about something other than mixing and mastering for a moment. And when you've taken a look at something and you come to a decision and you say, I'm either going to do this or I'm not going to do this, and you've weighed the pros and the cons of each. The pros of using mid-side mass processing, I should say, are very simple. You'll have something that's louder. You'll have something that is wider in the stereo field, or at least the perception of it being wider, and it's going to sound a bit clearer. That's the pros of using mid-side processing. Now, what about the cons? Well, if I had an hour or two to make this video, I would go into the cons of mid-side processing. There is a very long list of everything that can go wrong when you use mid-side processing. And that's why I say think about other things within your life that you do. When you take a look at something and you say the possibility of me getting this wrong far outweighs the possibility of me getting this right, you're probably going to stay away from that. And for that simple reason, that is why I tend to stay away from mid-side processing. Does it have its place? Absolutely. Absolutely has its place. Can you get around doing a mix or mastering without mid-side processing? Absolutely. You can use panning. You can use proper gain staging. You can use EQ. You can use compression. A lot of different things that you can do instead of using mid-side processing and still end up with an excellent sounding track. So, why would you want to use something just because it's out there? And I know a lot of us are guilty of this. I've been guilty of it way back when, in the early days when I first started doing this. Bought a piece of gear and I said, I got to put this on every track. It's got to be on every track. I bought a compressor, got to compress everything. I bought an EQ, got to EQ everything. No, you don't. No, you don't. Just because it's out there, you don't have to use it. There are alternatives. And there are alternatives to using mid-side processing, which is why I choose not to use it 90% of the time. Now, there are some master bus processors out there, such as the Rupert Neve MBC rather, the Rupert Neve Master Bus Processor, the MBP. Solid State Logic also makes one, their Bus Plus, which has a mid-side processor built into that compressing unit. Two excellent pieces of gear. I probably would never touch the mid-side processor on either, only when it is absolutely needed. Only when it's absolutely needed. Other than that, I'm going to stay away from it and use panning. I'm going to use EQ. I'm going to use compression and everything else that's at my disposal. So, there in a nutshell is mid-side processing and why I choose not to use it most of the time. Now, let's move on to the second subject, and that being artificial intelligence within the recording industry today. Artificial intelligence is becoming more and more mainstream. It was just a buzzword just a few years ago, but now it's really starting to pick up the pace and it's becoming more mainstream, especially within the recording industry. There is one particular company that I'm looking at right now, and the name of the company is Sonable, and I'm going to post that. You might see it up here, you might see it down here. I'm going to post it right here on the screen for you. And they have a piece of artificial intelligence software, which I think is phenomenal from the reviews that I've read, from the other videos that I've watched, and it's called Pure Limit. This is a limiter in a plug-in form that uses artificial intelligence to analyze your track and then automatically creates a limit on that track so that it sounds louder and it sounds nice and even. Nothing goes above that limit. It sounds good, it looks good, and the reviews are good. So, what am I considering using in the future? The Sonable Pure Limit. They've also come out with the Sonable Pure Comp, which is a compressor, and the Sonable Pure Verb, which is their reverb unit. Haven't done a lot of research on those two, but that Pure Limit looks really, really intriguing, and I'm considering taking a look at that and possibly purchasing it. Well, I should say possibly purchasing it. I've already done the research. I've looked at it. It looks really cool. Nice piece of gear. Number 3, the one thing that I always use whenever I mix and master. And the answer to this may or may not surprise you. But it's very simply these two things right here, my ears. Now, before you turn off the video and say, oh, come on, that's what he was getting to, let me explain. Bear with me a minute. We live in an age today where plugins and computers have basically taken over the recording industry. Everything that you do now when you're mixing and mastering and recording and tracking is done on a computer screen. Your DAW is on a computer screen. Everything that you use is basically on that screen. You are looking at what you're doing. Back in the old days when dinosaurs used to roam the planet, when I first started mixing and mastering, we didn't have computer screens. All we had were these two things right here. That's it. We had a tape deck. I had a Tascam TSR8, which was an 8-track analog tape deck. I had a mixing board, and I had a bunch of outboard gear. I had a compressor. I had a reverb unit. I had all sorts of things. Tons of hardware gear. Everything was done with my ears. 20-something years later, Everybody's using a computer. Basically, you cannot do mixing and mastering and recording and tracking without a computer today. The problem with that is we've gotten so used to using our eyes looking at that computer screen, we forgot about these things. And there's a lot of software out there that is geared towards getting you away from using these things and letting that computer software tell you, do this, change this, turn this up, turn this down, compress this a little more, compress it less. If it doesn't do it all by itself, they're out there. Rely on these. That's what they're there for. I always use my ears when I'm mixing and mastering. The two most important tools in my arsenal are my ears. Sure, I'm looking at that computer screen to see what I'm doing, making slight adjustments here and there because it's necessary to look at the screen once you turn the knob, but you have to hear what it is that you're doing in order to make those changes. Learn to rely more on these two things than these two things. You'll do yourself a huge favor. That's it for today. Hopefully next video I'll be back in the studio and get back to you with another one. I've still got that video on the compressor, the multi-band compression as opposed to multi-band EQ and dynamic EQ. We're going to get to that. It's coming, I promise, but I want to do that from the studio so I can show you actual demos of how that's done and how you can use the two together and what to do and how to do it, when to do it, why to do it, and all that stuff I always like to say. In the meantime, remember, stay creative, keep creating. It's all about using your imagination. There are no set rules in this game. Think outside of the box. Keep making music, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Until next time, G Sharp Jams out.